you ask if you could play with it?
You can play with that ball, sure. It's all right, don't worry. My name is Lauren Oback, and I want to welcome you to our final session of Arthur Gottlieb's series, New York City Architecture. Today, we're going to be talking about the Chrysler Building. As you come in, your cameras are set to be on, but your microphone is muted. You can change those at any time. You'll also see our AI-assisted closed captions that are popping up the bottom. You can change those by hitting the green CC button, which is either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on what device you're using. We do encourage questions, comments, stories for today. We just ask that you pop those into the chat or you use the raise hand feature, because that's something that we can see right away. If you want to use your microphone to ask a question, just be sure to get somebody's attention first, because there's a huge delay between when you start speaking and when we can actually hear you. We are going to stop periodically to check that chat and check those raised hands, but we're also going to have a Q&A at the end. And at that point, you can absolutely turn on your mic and we'll be focused on you so we could hear what you're saying. Now to introduce Arthur, he is a local historian on subjects of political and military history. He was formerly a professional curator of naval history at the Intrepid. He is currently a certified senior advisor and a counselor, and he frequently works with veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. Welcome, Arthur.
How are you?
Good.
So who's that kid in the background?
That is a random child that came into my office.
You know, I'll tell you something, just for your own edification, there are labor laws about having children working that young. Okay. Personally, I don't care.
Having her inflate my beach balls out there.
Yeah, personally, I don't care. But if I find out she's getting paid more than I am, there's going to be problems. Okay.
And you could do a program on that about child labor law.
I can too. So anyway, how are you today? This is the last one of our architectural series on New York. I've got a great one for you today. And I'm going to go to my screen share. And I'm going to pull up the Chrysler Building. There we go. Everybody see that?
Yep, we see it.
Great. And this is just a like a blueprint sort of a thing that I picked up. The Chrysler Building is the essential New York skyscraper. I mean, it's if you're from New York, you know, I mean, it's people have their favorite buildings, et cetera. And that may sound silly unless you're from New York and you have favorite buildings. And the Chrysler Building is always right up on the top of everyone's favorite building. It's absolutely beautiful in the Art Deco style. So if you're an aficionado of Art Deco, and there are people who are aficionados of Art Deco, some good places to go see would be like Rockefeller Center, but the big daddy of Art Deco is the Chrysler Building. Absolutely gorgeous. And so I'll move to my next slide for you. Here's a nice picture. I like that. Do you like that picture? So here's my the first quiz of the day. You can see the Chrysler Building in the upper center of the building here. And it's a wonderful picture of wintertime in Manhattan. And I wonder if you see where we are here. We're looking down 42nd Street. Several blocks west of where the Chrysler Building is, which is on Lexington Avenue. So we are right astride in this photograph of Bryant Park, right, which is abuts the New York Public Library. And in the early 20th century, very, very early on, late 19th century, there was a reservoir that was on this entire parcel of land where Bryant Park is and the New York Public Library. I wonder how many of you know that as part of the Croton Aqueduct system. Very, very large aqueduct and rather a reservoir, an above ground reservoir. So Bryant Park and the snow in New York can be beautiful, you know, well, for about the first 50 minutes, it's beautiful. After that, maybe not so much. Here's a nice picture of the Chrysler Building. We are looking to the southeast, all right? We are looking to the southeast, and so therefore the sun is coming from over our right shoulder, which means that it's sunset, okay? And of course, the Chrysler building to our left, and you get a sense of the concentric rings that make up the top of the Chrysler building. And this is a building where you can't really appreciate it, even if you're walking by on the street, which is what many of my programs are about New York City. If, you know, especially if you're a native New Yorker, there are buildings that you walk past all the time, and or there are other structures that you walk past all the time. And you never really had the chance or the predilection to actually study the building. You know, it's just kind of there. And so we're going to take a close-up of the Chrysler building today. And it's just really stunning. I have an opportunity to work in the Chrysler building a couple of times. So here we are now looking to the northeast. And once again, we've got the sun coming from behind us. And the Chrysler building is one structure that is very sensitive to whatever the ambient light conditions are, right? So the building looks like a completely different building as far as its coloration is concerned, depending on the atmospheric conditions. The majority of the building, this sort of cream color that you see here, is actually brick. It's all brick. And besides the stainless steel trim on the building, the whole building is made out of brick. And it makes it the world's tallest brick building still to this day. All right. Now, of course, the brick is just a facing, but nevertheless, the building is the largest building that is faced in brick anywhere in the world. So the brick reflects different colors depending on whether it's sunrise or sunset. And it also, there's periods of time where the building was very, very dirty before it was restored. And of course, the brick was kind of dingy looking. By the way, what bridge is this in the background right over here? Anybody know? Okay, this goes across the East River, and it is at 59th Street. So the Simon and Garfunkel, if you're old enough to remember them, had the 59th Street Bridge song, Bridge Over Troubled Waters. And it was the 59th Street Bridge. When I was growing up, it was the 59th Street Bridge and or the Queensboro Bridge, right? It is neither now. It is now the Honorable Edward Koch Bridge, okay? And to me, it will always be the Queensboro Bridge. In the same way that the Tappan Zee Bridge has been changed now to the Honorable Mario M. Cuomo Bridge. Sorry to say that in my book, it's always going to be the Tappan Zee, right? So let's go to the next slide. See what I mean? Take a look at this beautiful picture of the reflectivity of under certain lighting conditions. Now here you have sunset, and you can tell that there are panels of the polished stainless steel on the top of the Chrysler building, which are reflecting those rich red and orange tones from the fact that the sun is setting over New Jersey and Pennsylvania, you see. And isn't this just beautiful? Take a look at the close-ups on this. Right, so now on this left lower portion, look at the way that these concentric circles are also different heights in their step down. These are things that you never see from the ground. You literally have to be in a building across the street or from a helicopter to be able to see these kinds of details. And that was often the case. When I was working my way through graduate school in New York City, in Manhattan, I also worked building mahogany law libraries and filing systems and things like that back in the days before everything was computerized, right? Because I'm old. And if somebody said to you, go get me that file, they expected you to come back from something that was in a filing cabinet, you see? And so I was in all of these buildings where they had law offices and different kinds of, you know, professional office flats. And I was fortunate enough to be up on the top floors of these buildings looking across the street to other buildings. And it was something that I loved. This is on the inside of what it looks like, by the way, in this old black and white photograph. You see these triangular windows at the top here, right? So the first floor of these windows was a suite of offices that was for Walter Chrysler. And they're not used now, right? It's really just stunning. Here's a nice black and white picture. I like black and white photography. And I like this one because I really wanted to accentuate the contrast between the black and the white as far as the brickwork was concerned. So you see these horizontal black, they look like twos of a comb, sort of. That's all black brick, you see. So the black and white photograph gives us a good account of that. And we're looking east over the East River. Now, the skyscraper of the Chrysler buildings age were all built out of steel box construction like this. You see, and you had these, imagine a bunch of rectangles that were made out of steel and they were all riveted together. An extremely strong structure, you see, and the Chrysler building was just like that. And the Chrysler building was going up in 1928, 1929, completed in 1930, and it was the tallest building in the world for roughly 11 months. What else was being built at the same time as the Chrysler building? Well, another building, right, at 34th Street and 5th Avenue, which was the Empire State Building. And the Empire State Building was going to be unquestionably taller than the Chrysler building. But in the meantime, you had this a bit of a prideful race about who was going to build the biggest building, right? So you have Walter Chrysler, who was building this building, and he is the namesake, of course, of the Chrysler Corporation of automotive fame. And he was in this headlock with this guy down on Wall Street that was building a building called 40 Wall. And they were trying to figure out who was going to have the largest building, you know, and, you know, this is the kind of ego games that people get into. And it was real bragging rights. This is a picture of a photographer named Margaret Bourke White, who was a famous photographer. I have an excellent biography on Margaret Bourke White, who is one of our foremost American photographers. And this lady was absolutely fearless, as this photograph would suggest. She's here up on scaffolding while the Chrysler building is being built. See that big camera and the bellows? And you have just regular kind of people building these buildings back in these days. Not to say that there's not regular people building them now, but the people who were building these buildings were kind of like my grandfather, right? My grandfather, who was an iron worker in New York City. And as most of the men were, my uncle Jack worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And my father, who just recently passed last year, was also in those kind of trades. And my grandfather, my father's father, he was like these guys here. He was European. You know, wore one of those flat hats like those old timers used to wear. And he spoke broken English, and he spoke 4 languages fluently, but yet was functionally illiterate, you know, and that was not uncommon back in the day. You'll also notice in these construction photographs that there's an absolute absence of any kind of safety precautions taken, right? There's no safety lines, there's no harnesses, there's no hard hats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the Great Depression, you know. right? 1937, 1938. The Great Depression was still on. The Great Depression was still something that was not finished until unemployment was erased by literally World War II, right? And we were ramping up our defense spending in 1939, 1940, particularly because it seemed apparent that we were going to be at war. So that was what actually ended the Great Depression, right? But here in the early 1930s, I mean, you really had the Great Depression. God forbid something happened to you on one of these jobs, there'd be like 1,000 people ready to pick up your hammer before your body cooled off. And there's the top of the Chrysler building being built. Right? Nobody ever built a building like this before. I mean, now the Chrysler building is widely copied. There's a lot of copies of the Chrysler building. There's one down in Philadelphia. I don't know if you've ever seen it. You'll see it if you drive even past Philadelphia. It's one of the largest buildings down there. And they kind of, they make the shape of the concentric setbacks on top of the building look a little bit different, like chevrons. But anybody can tell that it's a bit of a ripoff of the Chrysler building. Okay. And but here you have all stainless steel that the top of the Chrysler building is being built out of. Now we're kind of used to stainless steel. There's a lot of stainless steel around, but the only real manufacturer of the kind of quality stainless steel that they wanted back in these days was manufactured by the Germans, right? The Germans, who at this point was already controlled by the Nazis. You see, so we bought a whole bunch of this stainless steel. This is a long time. This is still, 1930, still a considerable amount of time before actual World War II proper. But the top of the Chrysler building and all of the embellishments on the Chrysler building that are made out of stainless steel, which there are many, is all German Krupp, K-R-U-P-P, stainless steel. It's another nice picture. Now, speaking of those things that I was telling you about that are made of stainless, you see the top of the building over here, this section right over here, which really isn't the top of the building. It's really the 61st floor. Can you see where my arrow is? Right, all around the Chrysler building, you have these remarkable eagle heads made out of stainless steel that stick out the side of the building. And it's really something to see. It's very cool, very unusual. And also in this photograph, you can see the complexity of the shapes that normally the average passerby isn't really grasping. Take a look at the angularity and the concentric nature of all of these circles forming this beautiful shape. Right, here's a nice picture that I just picked up. It's, when you have fog set in or atmospheric conditions set in, the top of the buildings in New York or any city, they become obscured with the fog. And the way that the top of the buildings are lit kind of gives this eerie sort of translucence to the cloud. I've seen this many times. So here's a cloud that is actually the top of the Chrysler building is, enveloped by this cloud, yet the radiance of the light at nighttime gives it this glowing effect. Lightning. That's a cool picture, right? You really got to be standing in the right place at the right time for this one. So that's really something, isn't it? It's a lovely photograph. Here's another one. This one is taken from the Empire State Building. Okay. And, you can see how the fog has rolled in. And that's the top of the Chrysler building. Isn't that something? And this photograph over here, I hope will give you a good idea of the complexity of the top of this building as far as the way they had to put this together. Remember, all of this starts off on a drawing board, right? And it doesn't get to the drawing board until it's in somebody's mind as far as what they want this thing to look like, you know? And that's always incredible. As far as who comes up with these ideas? It comes out of the mind of somebody who's an architect, and then maybe you're drawing it on, I don't know what, a bar napkin, you know? And then that builds in your mind, and then it gets down onto the drawing board as far as the finished product like this. And the architect was a man named William Van Allen, and he had a certain amount of license to be able to build this building on behalf of Walter Chrysler. Now, Walter Chrysler was somebody like, you know, who had enough money to essentially say, build me a building and, you know, go ahead and spend some money because I want it to be a legacy item, the building itself. And Walter Chrysler didn't want this building for the Chrysler Corporation, even though there were periods of time where offices of Chrysler Corporation were in this building. What Walter Chrysler wanted the Chrysler building to be was a legacy item that he could leave to his children. And that's what the Chrysler building was, right? Isn't that a nice picture? Just study this for a moment. And let the picture do the talking. You see these kind of panels that are intertwined, that are crimped together? This is actually, as a point of reference, this is something that's very popular for about the past 10 years. If you go through Fairfield County and you see new construction of awnings or porticos or different kinds of buildings, you will see that metalsmiths have been recreating this very specific thing in the form of roofing, where they're crimping together these panels. A lot of times it's made out of copper, right? In this particular case, it happens to be of stainless steel. But this style of construction, right, and that the particular aesthetic that this gives off is something that's very much in vogue today, especially around here, because it's a sign of, well, it's a bit of sign of affluence also, because you have to have the people and the time who are going to create something completely unnecessary just from the standpoint of what you want it to look like. You know, if you didn't have enough money to make a fancy roof, you'd probably just put plywood on it and then shingles. See what I mean? But it's just beautiful. So these are all metalsmiths that have to put this together. And it's stainless steel, which isn't really the easiest thing to work with either. And you can see how the polished stainless steel is practically like a mirror for anything that hits it regarding how much light or the color temperature of the light. Giving you an example of color temperature, coming from the east, the sunrise is usually a different kind of light than sunset. You see, because when the sun sets over the horizon, then it is actually filtered through different cloud layers, etc., which gives it a very orangey tone, you see. So the building here is a real reflection of what's going on around it. There are those eagles I was telling you about. You see them? Right there and right here. How many of you knew that these eagles were up there? I mean, you got to really look to see them from the ground. Right. And that's not something you want to do in Manhattan, by the way. You don't want to be one of these people walking around looking up constantly, you know, like, you know, nobody wants to be like that. Right. And because it kind of marks you as an out of town person, you know, and if you're going to, if you must look up, make sure you've got your hand on your wallet or something too while you're at it. So there are these eagles that are just stunning. And I got some good close-ups for you of all of this. And I want you to also take note of the fact that you've got, here's these, look at the black onyx brickwork that is used and the different shades of coloring in the brick. Okay, this building is a work of art. That's looking up. And you can see the under chin of the eagles but the incredible angularity of this building is like, to describe it from how the brain processes it, if you were just to look at it quickly, it would be like an impressionist painting, right? An impressionist paintings, which I'm sure you're all familiar with the various artists that were impressionist painters. It gets its name from the fact that your mind creates an impression of what you're looking at. If you get close enough up to an impressionist painting, it's really just a bunch of dots of color, you see? It's just a bunch of dots of color. And when you move back from it, your brain recognizes the patterns of those various dots, that collage of dots, and your brain creates an impression of what you're looking at. And that impression is a beautiful thing. You see, in the Chrysler building's the same way. You get to the close of it, you get really close to it, and you have a bunch of what seem like disparate elements. But when you move away from it, the impression is of this beautiful thing. There you go. There's one of our eagles. Take a look at this for a minute. Right? Somebody had to conceptualize this, or maybe copy it from something. I'm not sure. But this is all made out of sheets of stainless steel. And it has to be, you didn't weld the stainless steel together because they didn't have welding for stainless steel then. So they have to be attached and they have to be caulked up in this shape. It's just stunning. See, here's a good shot of one of the eagles. Now, this is post-restoration. This building underwent a major restoration. I forgot when it was, around the end of the last century somewhere. But the whole restoration of the building cleaned the brickwork and tuned everything up. And you can see here that they redid the seams on the eagle as far as where they're caulked together. And they also polished the stainless steel, right? And you can see this fellow over here in current times, and he's putting a little bit of caulking, right, with that paintbrush on the end of the beak of this eagle, right? And you can see now, of course, we have complete safety harnesses and hard hats, and if should someone take a wrong step, then they'll literally be able to be recovered instead of falling to their death. Now, here's another picture of the building. Right now, can you see this over here on the top right? Right, this is another series on the 31st floor around the building. Like the eagles are a completely different shape. Okay, but I wanted you to look at the different kinds of brickwork here. You see the way the brickwork gives us these chevrons in the brickwork, right? And then you have these other Art Deco embellishments here, right? And then I'm going to give you some close-ups actually of what this shape is. And I'm going to save it as a surprise about what it is. I wonder if you can figure it out. Remember that the Chrysler Corporation, Walter Chrysler, is an automotive manufacturer, right? So now we come to the point where there are references to cars. Well, cars from 1930 specifically. There is a good example and a beautiful photograph of how those stainless steel features, right, on the corners of the building on the 31st floor, what they look like. And you see how it's incorporated into this portion of the building that actually is angled out like that. It's really stunning. And look at these circles over here. You know what those circles are? Those are supposed to be car tires. And the stainless steel round thing in the center are what we used to call hubcaps, you see? And you have elements there that are like the old-fashioned cars. They had these sort of like these bulbous fenders, you know? And that's what that is. This is these are all automotive reference. And you know what this shape actually is? I wonder if anybody knows. This is the shape of what a radiator cap, right? Now, back in the old days, they had the radiator on the front of the car, and it was a separate element. It was like a prominent feature of those early cars. The radiator wasn't just like hidden, you know, underneath the hood someplace. The radiator was a prominent thing on the front of the car, and they had a radiator cap right on the top of it. And different manufacturers would use different kinds of, you know, symbolism on top of the radiator cap to represent their car company, right? Ford had its thing. Chrysler Corporation, this is what the top of a 1929 Chrysler radiator cap, that is what that is supposed to be. It's kind of cool, isn't it? I don't know, I like it. What can I tell you? Yeah, and it's not because I like Chryslers or I like cars. I mean, even from a craftsman standpoint, I think about what, you know, this thing started off on a workbench someplace, and somebody had to make this, you know, and I sort of appreciate it even from that aspect of it. See? 1929 Chrysler radiator cap. I think it's awesome. Here's another picture of it, right? And you can see it's a good effect. You see the brickwork creating these chevrons, right? And the black and the lighter color. You've actually got two lighter colors, you know, so the brickwork is just incredible on this building. There we go. And see the tire and the hubcap where my cursor is? And there is the radiator, not the radiator, beg your pardon, the fender, right? The old-fashioned cars, they had the hood that sort of went towards a point, and then they had the bulbous fenders, right? It's not like today's cars where everything's incorporated into one shape. And it's all reference to a Chrysler automobile. And here it is looking from, you know, a lower level. Very balanced, very proportioned. You know, you could take a large building like this, and if you're not careful with how you proportion it, the building will seem, you know, it'll seem top heavy. It'll seem off center. There are many designs of office towers in Chicago, for instance. The general design of office towers was completely different, and a different sort of a style and a different ideology, if you will, than New York skyscrapers. That's something that would be worth its own presentation, quite frankly. And the oldest real skyscraper in New York is the Woolworth building, right, which is all the way downtown. And that would be worth its own presentation. What made you able to build tall buildings, though, even when the Woolworth building was opened up in the early part of the 20th century, were two things. To be able to have a building this tall, you had to have some kind of a structural substance that was going to be strong enough yet flexible enough, you see, to be able to create that framework for the building, because these buildings have to be flexible. I mean, they're thousands of feet off the ground, which means that if you get hit with heavy winds or something like that, like a large oak tree, if the building isn't able to flex, it will snap, it will break, you see? And so steel became that material. Steel is a different material than wrought iron or cast iron. Wrought or cast iron will actually bend and snap. It does not have an element of resilience that steel has. Steel is the perfect material. It is strong enough, it is rigid enough, yet at the same time, it is flexible enough. It's the ideal material. And that wasn't enough. Once you've perfected steel, okay, you needed something else for a skyscraper if it was going to be a practical building. You know what that was? I mean, don't think about it too hard. It's an easy answer. The elevator. The elevator. right? I mean, without an elevator, until somebody perfected the elevator, I mean, by the time you walked up to the top floor of your building, it would be time to turn around and go home, you know? And you needed the elevator. And so you have Mr. Otis, who was able to perfect the elevator mechanism, where it not only could you have an apparatus that would be pulled up by an electric motor and a series of winches in an elevator car, but even more importantly, Mr. Otis had to create a braking system, whereas if the cable snapped, the elevator car inside the elevator shaft wouldn't go careening down to the bottom and kill its occupants, you see? So Mr. Otis was able to develop a safety system that gave people the confidence that if they got in a locked box in a shaft 1,000 feet off the ground, that they weren't going to pummel to their death. That's what you needed, steel and the elevator. And now you can have skyscrapers. Look at some of these Art Deco embellishments on these relief panels on the Chrysler building. One of the fascinating things about the Art Deco style is that you have the combination of very, very modern stylized themes from the most current technology. You know, radio was very big in the 1930s. So you had things like radio beams and lightning bolts and all kinds of angular things representing modernity. Yet at the same time, Art Deco gives you if you were in an Egyptian tomb looking at the artwork on the walls, that's what some Art Deco looks like. And that's what we're referring to back here. You see, it's a beautiful combination of the ancient and the most modern Art Deco. See? Now, this is something you'd never see if you were just walking past the building. You know, maybe you'd see it if you worked across the street or something like that. But unless you're, you know, into what we're looking at here, and I hope that you are, you wouldn't really even notice all of this details. Here's another shop looking from above, right? And you can see to good effect here these concentric setbacks leading to the spire, right? Now that spire on top was not an original part of the building, right? The spire was not designed as part of the original part of the building. Why is the spire there? Well, did they need it for a lightning arrestor, or they decided that they wanted to make the building more pointy? Why did they have the spire? It's 125 feet long. It is made out of stainless steel, and they decided to add it at the last minute, okay? And the answer is that building down on Wall Street that I was telling you about before, which Mr. Chrysler was in competition with to see who could make the highest building, was actually a couple of feet taller than the Chrysler building. And Mr. Chrysler was not going to have that. So he had in secret this spire designed, manufactured, and transported, and it arrived in the middle of the night, and they snuck it up through the building. And after that other building opened, Mr. Chrysler was able to announce that his building, now a full 125 feet higher than it was, has exceeded that other building in height. You see, so that's real New York stuff, right? There you go. I'll show you who's got the tallest building. That's why the spire's there. Personally, I couldn't imagine the Chrysler building without the spire, but that's the way these things go. Here's a nice shot of the Chrysler building. This is before the building was restored. And you can see that there's a lot of discoloration on the brickwork, et cetera. You know, there's a lot of ambient dirt in the city, you know, and not only that, but brick is a relatively porous material and will absorb much environmental pollution, okay? You can see the pictures of the building. Anytime something is pre-restored to post-restored, you can always tell the difference right away. But it's the same shot, one taken during the daytime, one after the sun has started to set. You see? The building looks completely different, doesn't it? So the reflectivity has much to do with the appearance of this building. Now I'll get to the other parts of the building, right? I've got a whole nother, the second half of the program is all about the interior of the building, right? But this is just, it's just awesome. You know, we use the word awesome, we throw that around, and oh, I had blueberries on my cereal this morning. Oh, it was awesome. No, that's not awesome. This is awesome, right? Remember, somebody had to build this. It had to be put together from scratch. Really something. Right, and here's another two concentric slides, one during the daytime, one as the sun is setting. And look at that beautiful plum color. Isn't that a lovely color? I love this picture. And you can see how the perimeter of these triangular windows, right, how they are lit in, I guess they use fluorescent or neon, and it really gives the Chrysler building that distinctive look at nighttime. Remember Margaret Burke White that I was telling you about? Well, she actually had an office in the Chrysler building, and it turns out the top of these eagles had this like patch, and there is Margaret Burke White, who has crawled on out of there and is taking a photograph, right? And there she is. Like I said to you before, Margaret Burke White is fearless. If that was me now, my knees would be knocking together. I'd be so scared. You know, back in the day, I was good with stuff like that, you know, but that was like 30 years ago, 40 years ago. When I was working on Navy ships, they had to crawl up to tall places, etc. You know, I was always the preferred guy. You know, I love shimmying up things. And the more dangerous it was, frankly, the more I liked it. I'm a long way off of that now. Anyway, there's another famous skyscraper in the background there. I wonder how many of you can recognize that. It's part of Rockefeller Center. It's the famous Art Deco skyscraper from Rockefeller Center. Right, it's usually referred now to the abbreviations because that's the trend of 30 Rock. Right, this is 30 Rock, and when I was a kid, it was the RCA building. Right, then later on, it became the GE building. Right now, it's the Comcast building. Right, which is the parent company to NBC, which still has its offices there. Here's a picture looking southwest from the interior of one of those triangular windows inside the Chrysler building. And you can see to good effect the Empire State Building. And you're also looking over the Hudson River at Jersey City and points beyond, which would be Staten Island down here someplace. This is a picture looking directly north up Lexington Avenue. And there's a building here. I don't know how well it's coming out on Zoom, but there's a building over here that I'd love to do a whole program on. And that is called the Citicorp Center. And the Citicorp Center is a very distinctive building on Lexington Avenue. And it has an interesting history to it. It's got that slanted roof. Here's the inside of that area with those triangular windows. This was something set up right out of Art Deco, right out of like the 1939 World's Fair. It is, you know, you've got the planets and, you know, it's very, very futuristic. And this is where Walter Chrysler had some offices here. You know, you see this area right over here. This was used in a movie called The Aviator, right? And had Leonardo DiCaprio playing Howard Hughes, right? And Alec Baldwin was, I think he played, what was his name? Juan Tripp, if I'm not mistaken, who was supposed to be the head of Pan American Airways. And this was Juan Tripp's office in that movie, if any of you have seen it, right? So they actually filmed it here. Very cool stuff. Just another picture I pulled up of the Chrysler building. You can see this fog rolling in underneath it, you know? So here the top of the building is emerging from that fog. You see it? When I have my program on the Golden Gate Bridge, that's something that's a regular feature of many of the photographs of the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate is, by the way, not just the bridge. The bridge is named after the waterway, which is called the Golden Gate. And they have this, just the geographical and climate features or weather features of that area is that you have this fog that rolls in. So a lot of the photographs of the Golden Gate Bridge as, you know, a beautiful man-made structure are emerging from like this pillow-like fog, you know. We have that less up here in this part of the country, in the Northeast. Here's an advertisement I pulled up. Braniff Airways, right? The world's fastest airline. I don't know what that means really, but and you know, here's a little what must be a Braniff airplane, and they're flying over what? They're flying right over Manhattan. So, and you know it's Manhattan because there's Roosevelt Island, and there's the Chrysler Building, and there's the aforementioned Queensboro Bridge and the East River, right? And the other side of that is Queens. Another good shot of how the little features here. Notice that down over here, this series of windows vertically ends in this chamfered top here, very angular. But the center part series of windows is ended with a semicircle, which is perfectly concentric to this circle, semicircle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's the details, like I was telling you before about Impressionism, that make the whole thing when you stand back and you look at it. Now let's get down to the ground floor. So this is the ground floor, right? You're walking in off the street. Now this building is on 42nd Street on the corner of Lexington Avenue, right? Between 42nd and 43rd. And if you go down to Grand Central, for instance, and you walk out of the building at 42nd Street, right, and you go east, right, you will come right to the corner where the Chrysler Building is. And just take a look at the entranceway here. I mean, it's pretty cool. It's stainless steel. And remember, you know, what all this seemed like in 1930, right? I mean, look, see, here's the Art Deco stuff I was telling you about that's very modern. You see all of these zigzags and everything here. And notice here that these panels here, diagonally, are completely analogous to these panels in the roof, right? That I was showing you. You see, so on the roof of the building, you have that same kind of panels that are put together. You see, so it's completely integrated for its design, right? You've got the bottom has elements that are the same as the top, right? It's just gorgeous. Two revolving doors, one on either side. In the center, you know, for big packages and furniture, you can open them up. Right, here's another picture of it. You see? And so here you go. So once again, now you've got this black marble. You see that? And it's all polished and it's all cut. And remember, this isn't easy to do, by the way. I don't know if you've ever worked with stone, but this is not, I mean, you know, you didn't like order this from Amazon and it came in a box the next morning and all you had to do is glue the thing on. You know, this had to be designed, it had to be cut, it had to be machined, it had to be polished, and then it had to be glued in. I mean, it's just a remarkable amount of workmanship that went into this in a myriad of trades. You know, metalworking, glassworking, which is called glazuring, and you know, marble working, etc. I think I already said that. Now, the lobby. If you've never been in the Chrysler building, I'm telling you something, you got to go. I mean, I don't even know who they're letting in there right now. You know, I worked in the golden age where you can like literally walk in there. It was pre the war on terror, you know. I mean, I was out of Manhattan before, not much before, but by 1997, I was pretty much retired from my last Manhattan job, right? After having worked there for 20 years and gone to school there and everything else like that. And, but you know, I took my wife down. We went, I said, "Oh, have you ever seen the Chrysler building?" She said, "No." And so, of course, I had to show her. And I went in, and this nice fellow, I think it was a Saturday or Sunday. And, you know, he says, "Look, you can't come in the building anymore, right? Unless you have, you know, you work here." I said, "I don't." So he let us stand behind like the velvet rope and just look around. So I was able to show my wife this, which she had never seen before. And I have to tell you, the photographs don't do it justice. I mean, there is nothing like it. And I want to remind you that in 1930, I mean, if there's nothing like it now, that this was like literally mind blowing in 1930. It is all polished marble, granite, stainless steel, okay? And the roof is completely angular. It is hard to describe unless you've seen it. And I hope I'm inspiring you to want to see it. Right now, this is way down in the sub-basement, right? Which I've been down here. I mean, you got to go like 2 floors below the main floor. And I mean, normally in a situation like this, you would be done with the pretense of wanting to make it look stylish. But the Chrysler building was so thoroughly stylish that even down in the basement, it was stylish. This floor over here is a little simpler. This is a material that's common in high traffic areas. You see it in school and municipal building. It's called terrazzo. But anyway, back to the first floor. So the floor looks like it's parquet, but it's not. It's actually marble that is cut and put together as if a fine wooden floor had been made, except it's all marble, you see? Completely angular. It's just a marvelous job. The walls are made out of something called sienna marble, right? And it's stunning. The ceiling are panels of murals. And murals was a very, very important part in the 1930s to have ceilings that were painted with murals, right? We had the great era of WPA, that's the Work Progress Administration from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal. And it left with us an entire legacy. You've probably seen this, people in our audience today, of WPA art. It's typically in post offices and other municipal locations, certainly a post office that might have been built with New Deal money, like the town I grew up in. Like I was born in New York City, but my parents moved to a different town when I was, when I was young. And just right outside of New York City, not that far away, 15 minutes. And it was, the post office was a WPA post office, right? So, and there was a big WPA mural, and it usually had the sort of thing that most WPA murals have, which is, the purchasing the land from the Indians, that sort of a thing, right? And so that was a very big deal, the WPA type murals in the 1930s, and that's reflective here of the ceiling work in the Chrysler building. All right, take a look at this detail. Now, it's a good photograph because, once again, you've got this bronze letterbox. And this would have been on every one of the floors. They usually had these, these chutes that no matter what floor you were on, you could stick the mail in. Because remember, that was a long time before email, and they certainly weren't texting people. So everything went by, as we call it now, derisively, snail mail. But just look at the detail in the metal casting of the parts of this assembly. Right? I don't know if you've ever known anything about metallurgy or metal work, but somebody had to create a mold, and then the metal is poured into it. Then the mold is taken off. You see, I mean, and with this incredibly detailed eagle, there's our eagle head, which is the same fella that's on the corners of the building, right? You've got the mail slot, you've got the keyed lock to open up the door here, the hinges. I mean, this thing probably weighs as much as like a car engine does now, And look at the beautiful color of this marble, right? Another thing about the era of which these buildings were built is you had certain kinds of materials that are uncommon, right? And like, various kinds of wood veneers and places where you could harvest these exotic marbles that probably wouldn't be environmentally friendly today to do so, right? I don't know if that's exactly the case with the Sienna marble or not, but I'm just making a point. Now, the reason I stuck this photograph in here is to show you sort of like the expanse of the lobby. But you see these vertical columns here, right? These vertical columns have these long lights. And what they did here, and nobody ever done this before. Remember that, first of all, fluorescent lighting was something that was relatively new, right, in the 1930s. I mean, the only kind of lighting you really had was, neon signs, which was like came out in the 1930s, if I'm not mistaken also. But you had the regular incandescent light bulb, and the Edison bulb, right? But now you're using these linear tubes, right, of which became very popular in the 1930s. The most ubiquitous of was the fluorescent bulb. And what they did here was they took this channel of stainless steel, a long channel of stainless steel, and then they put the light fixture behind the stainless steel so that when the bulb was on, it would not reflect forward because the stainless steel was blocking the light. It would force the lighting backwards off of the marble and then back into the room, right? Which is pretty innovative and gives a very distinct look. You see, here's some examples of that in this, the way that the heights of these panels with these lights ascend and then descend on the other side. You see? And notice even in this case, the ceiling is completely shiny and all of that light reflecting off of it. These are all stainless steel encasements for these different windows, and back in those days in the 1930s, I mean, don't forget you had newspaper stands all over the place, cigarette stands all over the place, all sorts of things. There's that flooring that is kind of like that parquet look, except it's not wood, it's all marble, right? And there's those, the two revolving doors, one on either side, and there's the center door also. Here's just another picture of it showing those light fixtures to better effect. You see it? So you got this polished stainless steel, and behind every one of these, there's a linear tube illuminating it, and the light gets forced back into this this triangle behind it, this recess of marble, and then you wind up with this indirect lighting that is, it's unparalleled. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. So here's a good shot of where the wall, right? If you follow my cursor, here's the end of the wall, and there's the horizon line between the wall and the ceiling, right? So here's the ceiling, and notice that they've got these triangular affairs where the murals change. One mural, another mural, another mural. You see, you really have to study this to see what's going on. And it's the typical kind of murals they had for the day back in the 1930s of construction. You know, you wanted to show progress, right? You wanted to show progress in the built up world, the urbanized world of which the Chrysler building was a symbol of, right? Was that we men, which was synonymous for everybody back in those days, have literally mastered the skies, right? We've mastered the skies, we've mastered the oceans. You have these gigantic steam ships and aircraft that can fly spans of oceans, and we can have buildings as tall as we want to make them. So there was this special kind of confidence that was around. Of course, if it was the Great Depression, so you know, you had this period of time, as was reflected in the WPA murals of the artists of the day, where you wanted to highlight the individual laborer. You know, it was the dignity of work, and so you were showing men who were, you know, without shirts, with big hammers, and they were very muscular. And it showed you, you know, you didn't have to have a PhD in astrophysics to get respect. It was the average guy with a shovel was just as important as anything else that was going on. Here's another one of the entrances. This is the entrance to Lexington Avenue, see? And you can see that lighting system that I was telling you about. This is from the inside looking out. Isn't that just beautiful? And then it says LEX Ave, and it's all in stainless steel, right? And look at that beautiful floor, how this is also concentric in a sense. And then you've got this incredible polished, and these things are highly polished. If you've ever worked in one of these buildings, you know that the guy there with the floor buffer, I mean, it, like every day they're buffing the floor, you know? It kind of makes you want to go and put a like a big pair of white athletic socks on and start running and just sort of like slide across the whole affair, right? If you know what I mean. See, there's a close-up. This is over one of the elevator banks, right? So you can see, here's the stainless steel. Actually, it is a neon too. You see that? Because you can see the reflective, it reflecting in the marble here. And you can see these cracks. Those cracks are natural because they're in the marble itself, right? That are being illuminated by these neon strips, right? And it gives you just enough lighting to illuminate, enough, and it's indirect, so the lighting isn't in your face. And at the same time, it becomes an aesthetic treat to look at the entire affair. Right? Here's just another, you know, orifice with a clock, etc. Now, this panel of lighting, this one I'm showing you on top over here, was this one right there. You see? Now let's go into one of the elevator, where they have the elevator, banks of elevators, okay? One of them. Now, I have a whole series here that I want to show you the elevators, because the elevators in the Chrysler building are second to none. And you got to see this, and you'll understand why I'm going to take the time to do this. I mean, this just blows your mind. And by the way, you see these little white dots over here? These are recessed lighting, right? Now, recessed lighting is very, very typical in our lighting schemes today. But in 1930, whoever had recessed lighting, you see, in the ceiling like that, you know, coming out of what was typically called hi-hats. And it just, wow. So here we are looking further into that elevator bank. Take a look at the richness and the tone of this sienna marble. Let that soak in for a second. Now, as I said before, I don't know what you know about stone or cutting wood or anything else like that. And when I mentioned wood, because if any of you have been or woodworkers, and I don't mean like, you know, framing carpenters building a house or something. I'm talking about furniture makers. Now, if you look at a typical piece of furniture, or you look at a piece, maybe I don't know, even a door that has a wood veneer on it, okay, you'll oftentimes see that the wood is in two pieces, but it is completely symmetrical to each other, right? And let's look at it this way. If you have ever butterflied a chicken breast, there you go, okay? So you got a chicken breast and you slice it literally in half, and then you open it up like a book. See what I mean? That's called butterflying it, right? Because like the butterfly wing, see? Technically speaking, the features on the left side are going to mirror that of the right side, see? And that you do that in woodworking too. You can cut a piece of wood down, right down the center, and then open up both sides. And both sides will have completely symmetrical grain patterns because you took the one grain pattern and you literally split it in half, right? Take a look at the marble here. Can you see that if I was to draw a line straight down the center of this, now there's a seam there that you can't see here. The left side of these marble panels and the right side are completely and exactly symmetrical. So you had to take one piece of marble, literally cut it perfectly in half, like slicing a thin slice off of a loaf of bread, and then opening both sides of that up. And then it gets ground, it gets polished with successively finer grits of abrasives and water, so it doesn't burn, and then finally put into a high polish, and you wind up with that. It is a perfectly symmetrical wall made out of one piece of marble. Now, if that doesn't impress you from the standpoint of effort and design, I can't help you, okay? And the elevators themselves are literally stunning. Take a look at these doors. I got some close-ups for you. The doors are made out of bronze casting, right? With highlighted metallurgy, or not metallurgy, but metal, raised metal. And they are filled in between the raised parts with exotic woods that are made out of veneer, right? In other words, thin wood that are completely exotic. And once again, on the side here, remember I was telling you about the symmetricality of all of this marble? It's perfect. It's a work of art. It is unbelievable, the marble work in this building. There we go. Here's a shot, one shot of the elevator doors, right? And once again, it is various kinds of woods that are all like, I'm talking about burled maple and mahoganies and all sorts of things. And, you know, it's not something you're just going to go and find in Home Depot either, right? See, there's a better shot that is in the correct color temperature. And take a look at this. It's not painted on there, right? All of the brass coloring is actually metal. And then it's filled in with various veneer. It's absolutely stunning. It's remarkable. right? And this photograph is split in half. The right side is the front part of the elevator doors. The left side is the inside of this particular elevator, right? So now remember Art Deco, you've got all of these old sort of Egyptian themes, but on the inside, it's also Art Deco, but it's the most modern of kind of a cubist style, right? You can see the squares, right? And these repetitive angles and all the rest of this. So you go from like this old Egyptian theme to this completely modern theme. And once again, it's all exotic, beautifully inlaid woodwork. You see this panel up over here? That's the grate that has the ventilator in it, right? So you have fresh air in the elevator. You see, here's another elevator, and this elevator is actually different. The veneer is a different design. You see, so you've got the stainless steel, you've got all of these wooden panels, all hand cut and glued into place of these beautiful woodwork. You see all of these panels? There is this cast specifically for its perfect, this is called a ventilation grate, right, or a register. But look at it, it's just, you know, it's not something you're picking off the shelf, you see, at the store. There's nothing like it. There's a close-up shot of that ventilator. See it? And you can see to good effect if you've got an antique piece of furniture that has custom inlay work. And this is a skill set gone by. Okay, this isn't exactly something you're picking up from IKEA and putting together with an Allen wrench. All right, this is a skill set gone by. All of this is walnut. This color here is what we're looking at. And it's the chevrons of this. I mean, it's in two pieces. The angularity of where the grain meets is perfect. I can't even, it's hard to even explain it. The pictures don't really do it justice. Now, as far as the ceiling back in the Chrysler lobby was concerned, right? So here's the wall, if you can see where my cursor is. We're in between where the wall goes into the ceiling. Right, and you can see these the triangle and the chevroning I was telling you about right over here. You've got one mural here, you've got another mural here, you've got a third mural here, and then you've got this kind of compass rose in the top. Now, this is before it was restored. I want to show you the difference in brilliance between before and after the restoration. So here's another one. There's that internal triangle, the first one. And you see what you got here, if you can make this out, you've got the back of the torso of a man, very muscular. Can you see it? And here's his bent neck and his head going through what looks like a hole, right? So you've got essentially many of the artists that actually did these murals back in these days, right? You know, they got in trouble later on, like, you know, for seeming too, you know, communistic or socialistic. And they depicted the worker, right? Literally building the world, you know? And it was very, very typical for this era to have this kind of symbolism of the average laborer who was just completely muscular and dignified in his humbleness. And he was the one who was responsible for the built world, you see? That's what we're looking at here. There's that compass rose I was telling you about on the ceiling, right? So this is, you see this compass rose right up here? That is this, right? North, south, east, and west. You see, so we're looking straight up. Right now, this is kind of dull, and it was pre-restoration. So you had these restoration specialists that came in and used all of these special materials to actually remove what had taken the brilliance away from the actual original colors. And this is not easy to do. It's real specialized stuff. You see? Can you see the difference? That is after the restoration. That is pre-restoration. And you can see it's kind of got this like kind of dull amber tone over the whole thing. And you do a chemical analysis of actually what that stuff was that you removed, and it was tar and nicotine and things like that that created a deposit on this, because after all, for decade after decade after decade, everybody was walking around with a cigarette in their hand, and so that's what you wound up with. You wound up with all of this smoke, and it was from smoking. And if you ever watch like an old movie, like I like to watch Turner Classic Movies when I can, and I don't have a lot of time, but when I do, and it seems like every single person in those movies from the 1930s and the 1940s and even the 1950s, I mean, they were like chain smoking cigarettes. Everybody was chain smoking cigarettes. Okay. So that's what all that stuff was. See, and here's another close up, right? Couple of close-ups looking up at that ceiling, and they're literally showing the construction of the Chrysler building, right? And what they're doing here in this particular scene is another trade that is essentially extinct right now, which is the plastering of walls, right? So if you've ever worked in old construction, like I told you, I used to work in construction, so you would have old houses or old buildings, and if you smack the wall, I mean, it was like cement, that's what it felt like. And they don't make walls like that anymore, as you're well aware. I mean, you go and you buy gypsum panel, and it's maybe half an inch or 5/8 of an inch thick, and you screw it onto the wall. And and if you walk around, you can tap it and you can actually sense the hollowness behind it. Not so the old buildings. The old buildings were made up of plaster, which is like mixing cement practically, and you actually trowel it into a perfectly smooth finish on the wall. And this is just something, it's a skill set that just doesn't exist anymore unless you're a specialist in restoring old buildings. That's what they're doing here. And here's some more people working at the end of a crane, and of course you've got to have these girders and riveting processes. And so this is all what it looked like from the laborers building the Chrysler building. Here's after restoration. Can you see the difference in the color? That's really something, isn't it? There's those fellows who were doing the plastering. This guy's got a trowel in his hand, and he's smoothing out the plaster on the wall. Right, here's another shot on the ceiling. Right, over one of the entranceways, you literally have a depiction of the Chrysler building on the ceiling as a mural, and that's what that is. Another common theme that's depicted in the ceiling of the Chrysler building in the lobby is this is like having a picture of a rocket ship now. I mean, it's aviation. I mean, in 1930, you have depicted here the Spirit of St. Louis, which in 1927 was the aircraft that Charles Lindbergh used to fly solo for the first time from Europe to from New York to Paris. And Charles Lindbergh was just as famous as like Neil Armstrong was when Neil Armstrong was the first man to land on the moon, And so in 1930, I mean, this was like if you wanted to show the level of progress that humanity had made, so to speak. I mean, you had to put the Spirit of St. Louis in there, you see. Because if one man can fly across the Atlantic Ocean in a machine, I mean, that was like, I mean, what can't you do? And here's some other airplanes. These were typical of the German airplanes of the day. These over here, the tri-motors, right? And you had the Ford tri-motor also. And there's a nice photograph outside looking at the two famous skyscrapers. I mean, there's a lot of skyscrapers in New York, of course, but we're kind of focusing on the classics right now, aren't we? And so you've got the Chrysler building and of course the Empire State Building here in one shot. And it's a beautiful shot looking west out over looking southwest. And it's just a beautiful photograph, you know, and if you've ever taken a helicopter ride around Manhattan on a clear night, it would be well worth it. I'm sure it's expensive, but there's nothing like it. When I was a kid, I was in a unusual position because my older brother, right, had he had an airplane, and we used to fly. I mean, this was before the age of, you know, it was before 9/11, obviously. I'm talking about a long time ago. And you know, my older brother was like, hey, you want to go flying? And I'm like, yeah, sure, you know. And you know, as like a 15-year-old, I was like, had the hands on an aircraft. And we would fly down the Hudson River, and it wasn't hard to get permission back in those days from the air traffic controllers that, you know, we were sightseeing. And seeing Manhattan from the air on a clear night is just, I mean, it's just stunning. It's just, I mean, it is to me. I mean, maybe it wouldn't stun somebody else the way it had an impression on me, but I'll leave that to you. And I'll never forget it. The bridges, the Statue of Liberty, George Washington Bridge, all of the bridges, all of the buildings, the streets, one right after the other, the traffic, really something. And here we are back where we started without the snow. You know, there's our 42nd Street, there's Bryant Park. Here is the New York Public Library right there. Okay, so here's a bonus question for you. The two lions in front of the public library.
Mhm.
Yeah, what are their names? Oh no. I should know this. I know what you're thinking. All right, I won't keep you in too much suspense. Patience and fortitude is the name of the two lions. So there's your bonus question. And I gave you the answer. Patience and fortitude. So in case that comes up on Jeopardy, you can thank me, all right? Now, you know, I mean, I'm good for a prank here and there, but you know what? Yeah, I'll tell you, there was a lot of pictures during the Great Depression where you had these people doing, I would classify as nutty things, right? You know, to make a buck or to do what they had to do. And there are pictures of like people who were part of carnivals and circuses, like on the edges of the most, like if I did for you my Empire State Building thing. I mean, I've got these people right on the edge of the top of the Empire State Building that are like these crazy gymnasts who are like people standing on top of people and that kind of a thing. No safety, anything. I mean, if they went down, they were going down. And here are these two people, and they're dancing, but they're obviously right on the edge of some damn building here, you know. So good for them, I suppose. That's wacky. Here's a nice picture with Moon. See it? How could I not put that in here? And that's, once again, that's looking northeast over the East River. So you've got Grand Central Terminal in the foreground in this wide angle lens picture. That's why it's distorted. And this is our last slide. And what I wanted to show you was, you know, you can get on a train. You know, I get on a train here in Westport, and on the weekend I don't have, you know, you just park your car there, and for $40 for 2 round tickets, you can go and spend the day in the city, and go down to Grand Central, and you can walk 1 block east rather, and you know, the Chrysler Building is literally right there, you know. So go down and take a walk and see if you can get into the Chrysler Building, and or maybe they have tours, I'm not really sure, you know, but I would love it if you had the opportunity to see the Chrysler Building. And the only regret that I have is that I won't be standing there with you. So ladies and gentlemen, that's my program for you today. I hope you enjoyed that. It's the last one of our series, and I look forward to seeing you for the next series.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Art.
You're welcome. Thank you. My pleasure.
I am going to stop the recording now.